Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you, Chanel, for the wonderful introduction. Tonight we will be painting Strawberry Fields, this super cute strawberry painting, perfect for summer. I'm really excited to paint along with you all tonight, and thank you guys again for being here with us. So like always, I'll run through the supply list, what you'll want to have on hand to get started painting with us tonight. So tonight we're working with an 8x10 stretched canvas. And the FolkArt matte colors that we're going to be using are Hunter Green, Teal, School Bus Yellow, Clover, Festive Fuchsia, and Fire Coral. And there's one color that I forgot to add to our supply list tonight. I'm so sorry, but hopefully you have it easily accessible to you. We're going to be working with white. So any kind of white will do, any shade of white. Hopefully you have that with you. If not, I can give you some tips and tricks on how to make your painting still work and look really beautiful at the end without it. We have a variety of flat brushes, some 1-inch ones, and then some smaller ones, and a couple of round brushes. I have a pencil with me. A heat gun or a blow dryer would be helpful for you tonight because we're going to be drying in between to kind of speed up the process so that we can get things done within the hour. And some palette paper, a water basin, and some paper towels. And I think that is just about it. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing that we're going to do is I'm going to add some School Bus Yellow to my palette. And I'm going to take my 3/4 inch flat brush and we're going to give it a rough coat onto our canvas with our School Bus Yellow. Alrighty. So once you've gone ahead and painted your entire canvas with the School Bus Yellow, while the yellow is still fairly wet on our canvas, I'm just going to set my brush down. I'm not going to rinse it yet. And I'm going to add some white to my palette. And taking my brush that's already a little bit loaded with that School Bus Yellow, I'm going to dip just the tip of my flat brush, not too much, about this much, with my white, and kind of in a crisscross motion, making an X pattern all along my canvas. I'm going to work that white into the background of our painting. And it's important that the yellow is still pretty wet. That way, the white is really easily incorporated into the paint and it's not dragging too much. And it's just really easily going into that background. I love this technique for paintings like this. I feel like it's such a simple way to create some depth and texture into the background of paintings. I don't know about you guys, but when I am painting at home or here at Plaid, I always, not always, but sometimes I struggle with what to do with the backgrounds. I feel like there's only so many things you can do, and it looks so boring if it's just one solid color. So I do love this technique. It works really well with most paintings. Okay, maybe I'll add just a little bit more yellow into some of those areas too. The nice part about this is you can really keep working with it until you get an outcome that you're really happy with. All right, that's looking pretty good to me. So now I can go ahead and rinse off my brush. And before our next step, I'm going to grab my heat gun and go ahead and dry the background of our painting. Okay. So now get your pencil ready. We're going to do a little bit of sketching here. So we're going to start by creating our strawberries. And I don't want you guys to be intimidated by this step. I know sometimes drawing with a pencil and no pattern can be a little intimidating sometimes, but painting and drawing is all about forming simple shapes. So hopefully I'll walk you guys through it to where you feel comfortable. I know you guys can do it at home. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is up in this top left corner, I'm going to really kind of sketch out a triangle, but instead of a triangle where it has sharp corners, we're going to round off those corners. So it looks a little bit like a candy corn or like a guitar pick or something. Okay, so we just made that first strawberry in our top left corner. Now we're going to do the same exact shape again in our bottom right corner. So our rounded triangle. And if you're not happy with the sketch the first go around, that is okay. That's why we're working with a pencil and not a pen. You can always erase it and try it again. Okay. Make that a little bit bigger. Make his head a little bit wider. Erase some of those marks. Okay. In our bottom left corner, we're going to make a leaf shape. So what we're going to do is I'm going to create kind of like a comma stroke, like a long C on one side there. And then we're going to mirror that with a longer C shape on the other side. We're not going to close it. So like that, you can see the two ends of that shape, they don't meet up, but that's okay. What we're going to do is we're going to take this first C that we drew and give it a little curve so it can touch base at the second line that we drew, just like that. All right. We're going to go ahead and repeat that process right in between our strawberries. Connect that shape at the end. And the fun thing about paintings like this is you can really decide the composition of your strawberries and your leaves. You can put them anywhere on the canvas that you want, and they'll still look great. And all of the steps that I'm telling you guys will be just the same no matter where you place your shapes. One thing that I do like in my paintings is when there's different varieties to the shapes that you create, meaning that maybe one leaf is smaller, one leaf is bigger, one leaf is going one way, the other leaf is going another way. I just find that that creates a lot more depth and interest into the painting, which is never a bad thing. All right, so now our canvas looks something like this. I'm going to put my pencil down, and next we're going to load onto our palette some Festive Fuchsia. This is one of my favorite colors. It's so pretty. And I'm going to take a medium-sized flat brush. So this is a number 12 flat. I'm going to dip it into my Festive Fuchsia, and I'm going to paint in those strawberry shapes that we sketched. So I'm using the edge of my brush, and I'm painting right up to those pencil lines. And I'm just letting my brush guide the way to create the precise lines that I want. We're going to do the same thing with our other strawberry.
Would you have a idea on how to mix a color or a couple of colors that will look like fuchsia? It doesn't have fuchsia.
That's a good question. So what you could do is if you have a red and a purple, you could do mainly red and a little bit of purple. That'll give you kind of a cute fuchsia hue. I do love the fuchsia in this painting. I think it's so fun and summery, but also this painting would work just as well if instead of fuchsia, you used red. Okay, once again, we're going to rinse our brush. Okay, now I'm going to take my hunter green, load some of that onto my palette. And I'm gonna take just a bit of a smaller flat brush. This is a number 8 flat, dipping it into my hunter green. And with that, I'm gonna fill in all of those leaf shapes. Okay, and to get into that more narrow part of our leaf, I'll show you guys a little further up close what I like to do. So holding my brush perpendicular to my canvas, I'm touching down and creating that line there, you see? We're able to get a super straight line. Woo. Crazy Charlie horse, sorry guys. Okay, maybe I need to eat a banana or something. Painting strawberries, need to eat a banana. All right, we're gonna keep going with our leaves.
What's your favorite way to eat strawberry? Like a strawberry shortcake?
Oh, that's a good question, Stephen. I think strawberries might be my favorite fruit. So I enjoy them several different ways. I do love like a really nice white cake with like homemade whipped cream and strawberries. That might be my favorite. I love a strawberry smoothie. Also, just like plain strawberries. I remember as a kid, my mom cutting up strawberries for me, and not that she needed to, but sprinkling a little bit of granulated sugar right onto them. That was a treat.
That was a good snack for me when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Maybell says strawberry cake and strawberry pie.
Mm-hmm.
Strawberry cheesecake, strawberry margarita.
Another two other very good options.
Shortcake smoothie. I had a strawberry smoothie today, actually.
So did I.
We didn't plan that.
No, we didn't. What's your favorite way to eat strawberries, Stephen?
I really do love strawberry smoothies.
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
Very refreshing. I also love those strawberry popsicles with like just the strawberries in them.
Oh yeah.
Those are so good. I could eat like 20 of them. Okay, so once you have painted all your leaf shapes in with the hunter green, I'm gonna go ahead and rinse my brush. Dry this one off. And I am gonna take my heat gun again and go ahead and dry these shapes. Alrighty, you guys. Next thing we're gonna do is load some fire coral onto our palette. And I'm taking that last flat brush that we used, fairly small flat brush number 8, and dipping it into the fire coral. And starting at like the top left side of either strawberry, we're going to create some highlights on our berry here. So not at the, very end of the fruit, but maybe like a ½ inch next to it. I'm going to drag down kind of at a curve, flicking my brush. So we're bringing our brush down, giving it a little flick once we've reached the end. And I'm going to keep doing that in straight lines at a bit of a curve there. And I'm starting with longer strokes. And then as I work my way to the right, I'm creating shorter strokes. And then the same deal, so one thing that's going to be important, depending on where you've placed your strawberries, we're thinking about where our light source is. So my light is over here. So that means that the highlights on my berries are going to be on the left side of the fruit. If you maybe have like berries here, you just want to picture a light source, like casting its light right onto the fruit. Whatever side it hits first, that's where you're going to place your highlight. So we're going to do the same deal on our second strawberry, creating longer strokes in the beginning. And then as we work our way to the right, we're going to create some shorter strokes. Okay, then I'm going to rinse my brush, dry it off. And next we're going to load some teal to our palette. Going to dip my small flat brush in there, and we're going to create some strokes with our teal on our leaves. So I want you guys to have fun with this next step. It's not really a science. You can really place these strokes wherever you want. I just like to be mindful of not placing too many strokes. You don't want to cover your whole leaf. Just be sparing with it. And, every once in a while, take a step back and see if you like how it looks. But really, we're just creating some very simple strokes all over our leaves that are just really going to give some interest to our painting. So I did a couple there. Going to do a couple on this leaf. I'm not touching the sides of my leaf. You can if you want to. I just chose not to. I don't prefer that. So I'm not making these strokes at the very edge of my leaf, just a little bit within them. You can make some wider, some more thin. Totally up to you. So there's lots of different ways you can do it. Now I'm going to rinse my brush. And then I'm going to add, I believe, our final color to the palette. We're going to add some Clover. Really quickly, I'm just going to hit these leaves with our heat gun. Okay, so now looking at our palette, we're gonna do a little bit of color mixing. So I'm gonna take 1 part Clover. And 1 part white. And mix those 2 colors together until they're really well combined. So we're left with a really beautiful light green. Gonna rinse that mixing brush. And next, we're gonna do a really similar process like we just did with our teal, but this time we're gonna use our light green color that we just mixed. Go ahead and rinse that. And now we're gonna take out our pencil and we're gonna sketch out the tops of our strawberries. So really similar to how we created the leaves around our strawberries, we're gonna create some C strokes, but I'm gonna start the top of my C right above our strawberry, not into the fruit like that. And then the bottom C is gonna touch down into the strawberry and mirror that on the other side. And then create some smaller leaves right in between those two. And a little rectangle at the top. And do the same thing with this guy too. So starting in the center of our strawberry, working our way out, mirroring that, then repeat that again on the other side. Just like that, okay? Now I'm gonna take our smallest flat brush yet. This is a number 4 flat. I'm gonna dip it into my hunter green and we're gonna fill in the stem leaves of our strawberries. Okay, I'm gonna rinse this brush. And I think I'm gonna use this tiny brush to keep going with our details on our big leaves. I'm gonna dip my brush into just straight clover, and I'm gonna keep adding those details into our leaves. And then I'm gonna rinse my brush. Okay, now I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna dry our painting as it is right now. Okay, next up, we're gonna focus on creating the veins in our leaves. So I'm gonna take a number 1 liner. You can use a thin liner brush or a thin round brush, whatever you prefer at home to create straight lines. I'm gonna dip this brush into my Festive Fuchsia. Work harder, not smarter. If it's easier to orient your painting in a different way, whatever works best for you, then by all means, feel free to do that. So in the middle of our leaf, at the first point, we're going to create 1 line that's going to stop about 1/3 of the way to the top of our leaf. One line like that. And then from that line, we're going to create some curved lines that are branching off from that first line, alternating as we go along the length of our leaf. Like that. Okay. And then with the same brush, while we still have the Festive Fuchsia on it, I'm going to paint, continuing again with just adding those details to our leaves to kind of give it something special. Creating some more lines. And for this one, again, it's totally up to you guys at home, but I do like it when the lines meet the edge of our shape. And we're going to keep going with that same process. I just saw that. So see, that's our leaf right now. We're going to keep going with that process with our other leaves. Alrighty, now I'm gonna rinse my brush. And with this liner brush, we're gonna do something similar that we have been doing on our leaves now to the stems of our strawberries. So we're gonna alternate with the green colors that we have. So that's gonna be our clover and our light green color that we mixed. And I'm gonna go ahead and dip my liner brush in one of those colors. And we're gonna create some detail lines on the edge of our leaves, in the middle of our leaves.
And then when you make those detail lines, could you hold it up again?
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome, thank you.
But just really alternating our placement. I'm gonna rinse my brush in between colors. Now I'm gonna go in with my clover. Here that is again. All right, now keeping with that same liner brush, I'm gonna dip it into my school bus yellow. And we're gonna create the seeds on our strawberries. So when we're thinking about this, one good thing is to keep the placement pretty irregular. So you don't wanna have like, rows and rows of uniform seeds. That wouldn't look very realistic. So we wanna kind of stagger the seeds. But also it's good to keep in mind that we'd like the seeds to be pretty tiny and pretty similar sizes and shapes. So I'll place one out there. And I'm trying to avoid creating these in rows. So it's almost like Sudoku. You don't want to place a seed right next to it in the same column or the same row if you can help it. We're just trying to stagger these.
How could somebody make that specific school bus yellow color?
So this is a pretty warm yellow. So most yellows would be fine for this painting. But if you have like a really bright yellow, you could add a touch of orange to it to kind of make it a little bit warmer. All right, you guys, we're almost done. We have one more step. Take your favorite color from the painting that we've applied to our palette so far. I'm taking my liner brush, and a good tip, if you guys have some paint that's been sitting on your palette and you're trying to create some pretty precise lines with a liner brush or a round brush, I always just like to dip my brush right into my water, not dry it off, and then mix a little bit of that water into the paint and incorporate it really well. And that'll help you achieve some fluidity in your paint movements and help you create some really precise lines. So in the bottom right corner, go ahead and sign your painting. Be proud of your art. And with that, everybody, we are done. So I want to give a big thank you again to everyone who tuned in with us tonight to paint Strawberry Fields. One more reminder, you can view the recording of this class tomorrow on youtube.com/Michael's Classes, where you can go back and pause and rewind and fast forward at your own leisure to kind of finish some of those details that maybe you didn't get to, or to have some fun with some friends painting with our FolkArt matte paints. Thank you, Chanel, for hosting our class tonight, and Stephen for moderating. I hope you guys are having a lovely summer, and we will see you next time. Bye, guys.